Okay, welcome to tonight's webinar. It's on progressive programming. So the aim or the objective of tonight's webinar is to give you a little bit more knowledge on how to work progressive programming in real life. So if we think about the problems we face with clients, they tend not to be able to follow a periodized program. So some days they'll not be able to come in and do a session, or their life gets in the way, or X, Y, and Z. It's very hard to program somebody for every single day for them to train because it doesn't always work out that way. But what we can do is make the programming progressive. So in order to do that, we have to take some steps. We have to, first of all, and this is very, very important, have a clear, defined goal. If we don't have a goal, we can't head towards anything. Now, this is going to come down to a very good onboarding process, as I've talked about in other webinars. This is also going to come down to a little bit of your own understanding of your own clients. So if you don't dig deep enough, you'll never find the underlying reasons for somebody's goal. And we need to know those reasonings. If we don't know those reasonings, we can never go back and help the client understand why they're doing it themselves. Because quite a lot of the time, the client will want to achieve something, but then when it gets hard, they quit. And the reason they quit is because they don't understand how important it is to them in the first place. So very important, have that goal. Second thing is, again, something that people going through the level 3 will be quite knowledgeable on by this stage, hopefully, and that is picking your phase of training. So in the workbook, they might say you can pick strength, you can pick muscular endurance, you can pick hypertrophy, you can pick aerobic, you can pick anaerobic. But the biggest thing to clarify with yourself and probably with the client as well is all the objectives of the training. So when you're building a program for your level 3, it's completely different for the real world applications because we might have to mix up those training systems, those phases of training. So let's think about it in the kind of, we have an athlete in front of us who wants to lose a little bit of weight to get peak performance. They may have to do some strength work with their compound movements. They may need hypertrophy with the isolation movements, and they may need some muscular endurance for sports performance. So we might have to mix up those phases of training to get the ultimate result for the client. It's never going to be just as simple as we're doing all strength this month or we're doing all this month. And again, periodization will allow you to factor that in. But in the real world, clients want to achieve different things. They want to get a better squat. So we might have to head down the strength routine, but they might just want to lose some weight. So we might have muscular endurance with that strength. We might use advanced training systems. We might not. These are things we have to think of when we're setting up that training protocol, because if we don't understand the fundamentals of the training, we can't progress from them. And again, that's what the seminar is all about, the progressive programming aspect. So if we understand where our set point is, where we set our journey off from, we'll understand a little bit better how to then push that performance forward. Now, the next thing you need to think about is the cycling of the training, or if you can, periodization. It doesn't always work, but it can work for some. But the cycling of the training means that you might have a block of training that lasts 4 weeks for a client because they're doing strength work. And then you might have a block of 8 weeks of training because they're doing hypertrophy and their body can handle that better. I tend not to go any more than 8 weeks when I'm doing a training program for somebody, because most of the time the body has well adapted by that point. Even if you're pushing the weights forward, it's usually adapted enough that we need some sort of stimulus on top. So this is where we have to think, right, what is the client wanting to achieve and how long are we going to give it in each area to then make sure they achieve that before moving on. So another good example would be a client who wants to get some upper body strength. You might want to work with them in the strength phase, the hypertrophy phase, but that person probably also wants weight loss. So we need to also be burning more calories than what strength workouts can provide. So again, factors we need to think about. But it is a good way of thinking, how long are we going to spend on that strength training phase or the hypertrophy phase before moving on to the next phase? Is it going to be a 12-week periodization program where 4 weeks we set up with muscular endurance, 4 weeks is hypertrophy, 4 weeks is strength? Or are we going to break down a 3-month block into different areas so we can try help that person? These are all things to consider when making the program progressive, because the first program, you shouldn't be just the night before they come in for their training delving in and being like, oh, what do I do with this person next? We should have a plan, or at least a kind of flow chart for a client, so we understand where they go to next after the current program is done. So really, really important to understand that and where you're going to take that programming. Then we have to also think about physical ability, nutritional ability of the person, and the mentality of the person. Not everybody is going to want to go hell for leather and do loads of reps and do high intensity interval training, and some people don't like treadmills and long duration, and we have to factor in these things right as the base of the program so we don't trip ourselves up. Now, a client who's losing weight will most of the time start to get more energetic through their training program, which is great. So we can then start to factor in more energetic things. So HIIT training is something that you might be able to come back to with a client. But if a client absolutely despises a treadmill, you're never going to go back to that. They'll never have the right mentality to use it. So we have to think about all those likes, all those dislikes. We have to think about the nutrition the person has as well. What time of day are we seeing the person? And how are they eating for a day? So if somebody's went a 9 to 5 job, they're coming in at 6 p.m. and you're asking them to do high intensity interval training and they've not really eaten, that's just setting yourself up for failure, setting the client up to feel really bad about their own training, that they can't perform properly. So again, when we're thinking about getting progressive performance from somebody, we have to take into consideration their own work-life balance, whether they can physically do some of the stuff. We should be testing this right at the get-go anyway, or we should be always testing. Pretty much whenever I'm with any kind of client, I'm always testing them. I'm always looking for things. I'm always trying to see if they're able to maybe get a little bit more out of something by just changing something very small. And these are the fundamental things we need to look at to make sure that they get that progression. So we have to get all those 3 things right in order to make sure that the program will be progressive. Because if somebody doesn't like something, they're not going to put their all into it. If they're coming in with the incorrect nutrition, they're not going to give their all. And if they really can't perform the exercise well, you're not going to get the best out of them. So really important points to set up yourself for being progressive. Once you nail them, your client will see success because they will be able to perform the move correctly. That means you'll be able to progressively load it. If the client has the proper nutrition, then you'll probably get more maximal load out of them if you're doing strength. If you're doing hypertrophy work, you're definitely going to see muscle getting gained because they're in a surplus of calories. If they're in a deficit of calories, you'll definitely see weight loss, because that's what happens when we pick the correct programming and the correct things for the client. I would always, and this is a great day and age we live in, I would always have a set of notes for my client. If a client comes in and they're performing their exercises I might just want to note something quickly on my phone. I might want to add that into a portfolio I maybe have of them. And this comes down to your client care. And that client care can really help you later down the line, or it can help just reward the client. Because if you hit a fundamental goal and they don't realize it because they just don't, then you can help support that. If they've hit a milestone where they came in at the start of their consultation and said, my deadlift is shocking, I keep rounding my back, and now you're starting to take pictures and show them how good their deadlift has got, that's a great way to use smartphone technology. It's a great way to make sure that the client sees progress as well. If they think, oh, I'm finding this weight really hard, then remind them that they've only just started and this is what weight they started at. So you've actually doubled that weight now. How good is that? Having these little notes and always assessing the client so you can have those notes is amazing for you as an instructor, because you can see that progression happening all the time. But it's also markers for that progression. If we don't take these notes, we don't know what's happening. It will just pass us by. So again, not having to even set process goals, we should understand as instructors, PTs, coaches, whatever you want to call yourself, that if we have those markers written down, we will know we've nailed different points of our training. Then we need to think about the program structure itself. So like I was talking about earlier on, some clients may come in and they've just finished their work for the day and they might not have too much energy. So would it be a prevalent thing to put in a compound movement right at the start of their training set schedule for that day? Probably not, to be perfectly honest, because they don't have the energy yet. And sometimes you'll find there's certain types of clients that energy breeds energy. So once they get in and they're halfway through their session, they are so energetic, they've got all that back, they feel good, they're ready for it. So maybe that compound move needs to be at the end of their session. Or maybe they come in and they need something to wake them up. So maybe doing a quick little bit of HIIT training with them to just wake up those energy systems. There's loads of different things that you can do for that. A good one I used to use with clients who came in with low mood would be slam balls. And I'd be like, right, whatever frustrations or whoever's pissed you off that day, think of their face on the ground and give me 10 slams. And we would do a few sets of that with them, just trying to bring that energy level up, but also dissipate some of what's going on in their own day. Another tool was boxing or kickboxing. Sometimes it was just getting in and lifting something heavy. So maybe just going into that compound movement straight away was the thing that would wake them up. But again, you'll know your clients. So let's always think about people on an individual basis when we're deciding that program structure. There is many different ways to build a program. It doesn't have to be as simple as compound move at the front, isolation exercises afterwards. That's just old school bodybuilding. There is so many different fundamental ways to lay out a program, and obviously through your course you'll learn some of that. But if you are struggling and you want to know something more of them, go back and kind of revisit the advanced training seminar that I did, and also just ask questions on it. Yeah, there's a good few ways you can lay it out, so just ask if you don't know too many. That's kind of what the Facebook group's for as well, so you can all ask questions. The next thing is figuring out your plan for your client in terms of where do they want to go in the future. So this could be just your run-of-the-mill person that comes into the gym. They just want to feel good. But that doesn't mean they might not select to do a half marathon down the line. That might not mean that you've got an athlete who doesn't want to roll back the training a little bit. So we need to think, does the client need a basic program? to help them with that? Do they need an advanced training program with advanced training systems in it to help them with progress? Do we then take it up a notch again and do advanced training? And there is such a thing as above advanced training, because there is only certain people who will be able to complete it. Then you go into the athletic domain, where people are performing athletic moves when they're loaded. And then you've got the final Olympian kind of stage, where you are then going into those Olympic type movements, those kind of bigger lifts, but also breaking it down and making sure their body is capable of tremendous different things. So there is so many different levels there that your person might want to achieve or want to stay at. So if somebody wants to stay basic training, great, let them stay there. They don't need the advanced stuff. Maybe they don't like supersets. Maybe they don't like giant sets. We don't need to give them that. Maybe they don't want to do Olympic lifting. That's great. Keep them doing the things that keep them coming, because that's going to be the thing that helps. And then because they like it, you can progress it. So just because somebody's doing basic training doesn't mean that they can't progress it. Remember, there's rep changes we can make. There's time changes to rest. There is sets changes. We don't have to stick to 4 or 5 sets. We can go well above that, as German volume training tells you. So again, have a real big think about where your clients are at, where they want to be, and where the progression is going to take place. Make sure as well, and this is the next point, on the back of that, that your training is scalable. And by scalable, we should be able to go up the ladder and down the ladder. We should be able to progress the training forward and regress the training back as is needed. If you've got somebody doing maximal strength training and they get that 1 rep max, you're not going to be able to continue to do 1 rep max training for 6, 8, 12 weeks. The body's going to break down too much and the person's probably going to get injured. So we really need to think, right, how do we progress that forward? Well, let's add on some sets, let's add on some reps, but let's keep it heavy so we can start to boost the performance. And again, that's just one example. It might be that they're trying to gain muscle, but they've been in a hypertrophy stage for too long. We might need to deload them and say, right, for 2 weeks, we're not doing hypertrophy, we're doing muscular endurance, but I'm going to focus on X, Y, and Z to help you progress forward. And again, if you understand the methodology behind the training you're giving to somebody and you can explain it to the client, they're more likely to actually adhere to the programming. Whereas if you just give a client a sheet of paper and say, go and do that, they're never, ever going to actually do it. And if they do it, it's probably going to be done wrong. So we need to make sure that everything is scalable. Can we progress it? Can we regress it when needed? And again, that's when needed. Sometimes we have to bring it back to push it forward. Personally, this is something I don't do too often. It just happens. And again, it's because I'm constantly tracking. And that is the waypoints or the mini goals for a training schedule. Now, the client might have expressed that they want to lift a 100 kilo deadlift, and that's great. I'll help them there. But that's just a point along the way. And having these waypoints is great for the client's feelings of success, because a lot of the time they will attribute success to certain things. So we do need to be wary of that. But as I said before, if you don't take notes all the time and it's not your thing, then having those process goals in place, having the mini targets, having the waypoints there is really going to help, especially if you're using the SMART system, which is highly advisable. And as I've alluded to earlier on, rep, set, time are all variables we can use to progress programming forward. Again, a small increase in loads during your compound movements is going to have a big payoff, and you can up the weight a little bit more during some of those smaller hypertrophy workouts, the isolations, because that is going to help push the client forward. Adding on an extra set is going to push the client forward. Taking off some of the rest time is going to push the client forward. Making sure that they hold a position while they're resting is going to push the client forward. There is tons of ways, tons of variables to push clients forward. We need to understand what ones we're comfortable utilizing and what ones are going to be good for our clients. For instance, time under tension work is great, but some people don't have the muscle capacity to be able to do it in their first basic training schedule. Some people don't even have the capacity to do it later on down the road. So we need to understand our client in order to progress it forward. The last little thing I would say is, and this is something some PTs are guilty of, but not all, and that is to track progress. So if you're not tracking the progress of the client, if you do not know what weights they're using, what sets they're doing, what reps they're doing, what their rest time is, then you're doing a disservice to your client, because if you don't track it, they won't. And if you can't track it, you won't be able to progress forward. If they're doing 10 reps one week and then they do 12 reps the next week and it seems harder, of course it's going to be harder. You haven't tracked it. The client might get disillusioned with it because they don't know if they did 10 or 12 last week. They don't know if they did 5 or 6 sets. So we need to be the ones to be responsible for that. And it's not good enough just having a piece of paper or having the program on your phone. You need to constantly be checking up that that's moving forward. As a rule of thumb, and it's not for everybody, but definitely for my guys, I only let them stay 3 weeks at the same weight. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a 1 kilo increase, as long as there's an increase. If the weight doesn't change, then maybe they get an extra set. And if the sets don't change, maybe they get less rest time. And this is because I understand that the body will quickly adapt. And if I quickly adapt with it, i.e. I change the variables within that kind of 3 week period, then I understand my client will see progress. And that's my little rule of thumb for getting client success. And really that's the whole point of progressive programming, is understanding the client, understanding our own knowledge base, and then how we produce that onto the clients. So good few points there. I think there was maybe about 10 or 12, and they will keep you succinct when building programs. They will keep you sincere when you're trying to explain your programs to clients. And they will keep you right in the fact that you are using your own ability levels to actually make those progressive programs. And probably my last little bit of advice is my favorite acronym, which is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't overcomplicate it, because if it's complicated for us, it's going to be even more so for the client. And if it's complicated, it'll be harder to adhere to. So remember and do everything for the client, and that'll keep you right. And it should see them get some sort of success. And then you'll be hailed as a good trainer. So that's all good in every department. So I'll take some questions now. We've got a bit of time. So if anybody has any, please speak up.